Welcome to the Nurses Out Loud radio show. We will be starting in a few moments, so please stay tuned. If you are watching on social media, please give us a like, share, and follow. And for those of you who would like some more info, please go check us out at nursesoutloud.com. Thank you.
For decades, nurses have been saying the same thing. Unsafe staffing costs lives. We've watched patients fall through the cracks because there just weren't enough hands on deck. We've seen the burnout, the moral injury, the impossible choices nurses are forced to make when caring for too many patients. Well, now, for the first time in history, the Joint Commission, the very organization that accredits hospitals, is finally making nurse staffing a matter of national compliance. Starting January 1st, 2026, hospitals will be required to prove that they have adequate staffing, that a nurse is on duty whenever a patient is in the bed, and that leadership is accountable for staffing decisions. It's a complete overhaul of the national performance safety goals, a new model that cuts old red tape and focuses on measurable outcomes, not just policies on paper. But here's what's interesting. This change didn't come out of nowhere. It's the result of decades of evidence, advocacy, and honestly, crisis. And that's what we're going to be unpacking today. I have Nurse Susie Eichinger, an experienced nurse in various areas of nursing for several decades. So welcome to the show with me, Susie.
Thank you, Jody. Thank you. It's so good to see you again. Thanks for having me on. I'm happy to be here. I'm very excited to talk about this. I think it's an amazing new development. We need to use it well. It's a tool that the nurses are going to be able to use now that this has finally been pushed into national performance goals for the Joint Commission. It's amazing. I'm so happy about it.
Yeah, when you texted the information to me, I was like, oh, we need to talk about this because it looked like they came out with it in June. And obviously, in the nursing circles, this isn't an area that we ever really focused on. We're always just hearing from leadership what we need to do, and we do it. And so many of us ask, like, well, where does this come from? So today I'm excited that we're going to unpack where it actually does come from. So the JCAHO, let's talk a little bit about JCAHO.
Right. So the Joint Commission of Accreditations of Hospitals Organization. So we all know about JCAHO when they roll into the building, when we're in the survey window, we know they're coming, everybody gets ready. I used to work in critical transport, and I used to love when JCAHO was there because the hallways were always clear. And if I had a vent and a big tree of all kinds of IVs, I knew I could get through the hallways. It was really the only thing good about them being there, because otherwise it was just, everybody was a stress monkey, but they have their national performance goals, and they come in and they do their surveys every 3 years. And everybody gets ready and has their survey and then make changes based on their findings. And it's very much around safety. It's most everything points back to safety.
It is. They say it points back to safety, and we can get into what some of those goals were so that nurses, can understand. Like, we live it every day, but we don't have the terminology, basically. Most of us think, oh, JCAHO's in the building or JCAHO's in the area, hide the coffee cups. Right? Because we're not supposed to drink for 12 hours. We're supposed to get up from the nurse's station and go drink.
To our hydration station. Go to your hydration station.
That's right.
The
Yeah,
only
hydration
time, I'll tell
station.
you, the only time that I remember that the hydration station was, I remember it used to be absolutely, you could not have any stuff at the monitors, because you could
Hmm.
spill your stuff on on the monitors at the central monitors. So that always made sense because that was when things made sense.
Right,
I was
right,
like, don't have a
right,
drink.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so JCAHO, I think, was founded in the 1950s, and like Susie said, it regulates safety and quality measurements, outcomes. It's linked to Medicare's conditions of participation.
Right.
The surveys are done anywhere between 18 and 39 months. They say they are unannounced, but like Susie said, we know when it's typically our season. And if we know that they're in the area, it's, the supervisors get on the phone and say, "Hey, JCAHO just came," or "JCAHO's on their way to you." We
Right.
know.
Right.
We definitely get advance notice, as Susie said, to clean out the hallways and
Right.
move our cups away from the nurses station.
Right, right. And yeah, as you say, Joint Commission accreditation is linked to reimbursement. It would be a catastrophic financial and reputational blow if the hospital did not lost their accreditation. And the Joint Commission finds major deficiencies. It can lead to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services pulling their funding. So it's a big,
Mhm.
big deal. And therefore, the fact that they're making nursing staffing a national performance goal gives us quite the tool if it doesn't end up being boiled down to paper compliance, and
Mhm.
that's gonna require a lot of courage and collectivism for the nurses to bind together and hold their feet to the fire if they're gonna do this kind of thing, and they're gonna create this new national performance goal. So yeah,
Yeah, and
Jake.
so when I was doing some research on this, I was looking into JCAHO, and outside of hearing what the requirements were, they were coming in the building during COVID, we found out that how do these patients and their families who felt as though they were getting unsafe care, how do they handle it? And it has been an accreditation that the hospitals have really cared about, to say that they were JCAHO certified. But I think over the years, hospitals have also said, you know what, we're not going to go with this accreditation. And I was interested to find out that the hospital system near my house, they weren't even JCAHO accredited.
So
So I
right.
couldn't even tell patients to go to JCAHO and file a complaint for them to come out and investigate.
Well, the alternative to that is the state. And see, this is the thing is if you decide as a facility that you don't want JCAHO coming in anymore, then watch out because somebody's going to survey you because the state's coming anyway. But the state is, I think that JCAHO has been kind of the fallback, right? So if JCAHO's not going to be pushing the buttons and is not going to be in there looking at your safety stuff, then you can bet your bottom dollar that the state will be in there. And if you don't want somebody breathing down your neck, you don't want the state in there because the state is the
Mhm.
government in a completely different way. I mean, that's the government, and they're going to make you pay. I mean, they are going to be a much more difficult to deal with than the Joint Commission. But that's a decision that they made. And I think that to answer your question, families can go to ombudsmans, state ombudsmans. That's one of the places that they can go in order to lodge a complaint. And of course, state boards, you know, what are the
Mhm.
medical board, the nursing board, um, and then up through the chain of command, all the way through to the board of hospitals. The hospital board of directors.
Yeah. Well, let's talk to the audience about a little bit of the performance standards that are in effect right now, so people can understand what JCAHO has done initially or has done in the past.
Right. So in the past, national performance goals generally um, uh, focus on safety. So specifically, correct patient identification, giving correct care at the
like
correct
two
time.
identifiers.
Right. Making sure you're, the right body part, you're removing the right body part, that you have an emergency management system, that you have infection control, prevention and policies, that patient rights and responsibilities, the reducing the risk for suicide, workplace safety and patient safety. So there's been many things. And of course, medication reconciliation. There's been many safety goals as far as, catheter-associated urinary tract infections and pressure injury prevention and things like that. So that's within the scopes of safety and patient care.
And so you and I would both agree that all of those that you just mentioned are very important.
Absolutely.
And then, changing that or updating it. So let's take pressure injury, for
Right.
example.
Right.
That's a bed sore for, the audience out there that don't know what we're talking about. Basically, they're saying that a patient should never receive bed sore while in the hospital.
Correct.
And so how they have oversaw that is in the emergency room, they want us to start and do a skin assessment.
Right.
But that's not that we can't do that, right? Like we're saving their life and they need to go to the floor,
Right.
Basically. But once that nurse receives the patient, they have to do a full on skin assessment and document if there's any areas of redness or open wounds. Because if that patient receives a bed sore while they're in the hospital, I believe Medicare was not paying for that.
Correct. Well, what Medicare pays for is the arranged payment that's going to come with a diagnostic related group. So the patient is admitted with congestive heart failure. They'll pay for congestive heart failure, but they won't pay for any sequelae that come out of the pressure injury. But plus they're going to have other data connected to how much pressure injury they've seen. Now that's the problem because it's paper compliance. And the paper compliance has always been, we've put these things into place. The ER nurses should be doing this and the admitting nurse should be doing this and everybody should be turned every 2 hours. And so they say these things, they have these nurses checking these boxes. They're doing the very best they can. But what they can say is, look, we did the best we can. It must have been the nurse. And the problem with it is we know that it's because the nurse didn't have enough staffing. That's the bottom line. The bottom line is always going to be labor, and labor is the biggest budgetary issue. So the interesting thing with this, I don't want to get ahead, but the interesting thing about this is there's been no accountability upstream. There's been no accountability upstream. So if the nurse if there is a pressure injury or a bed sore, the nurse has nowhere to go by making the people who made the decisions about staffing accountable for why he or she did not have proper staffing to do the Q2 hour changes. Because these patients that need to be turned every 2 hours, if you have 6 patients and it takes you 15 minutes to do the work that it takes, and that's being very, very conservative, to turn the patient, and you have 6, what's 6 times 15? That's a lot of time. How are you going to get anything else done if all you're doing is turning your patients you're trying to turn your patient every hour and a half or every 2 hours, and you're spending an entire hour and a half turning patients? When are you going to give meds or educate your patients or do your discharge instructions or your medication reconciliation? So there's never been any upstream push back. There's never been anywhere to go to push back
for nurses
to go to push back. It's always been on us that it didn't work out, that this patient got an injury, punitive. Oh, this is what our numbers, we're in the red. You need to see this. This is all awful. There's never been anywhere for the nurses to go back upstream and say, no, it's your fault because I don't have proper staffing. And see, now we may have a tool. We may have a tool or a weapon.
Right.
a weapon.
And like California, they have ratio laws
Mm-hmm.
in place, right?
Yes.
And they have seen that there are fewer errors and fewer deaths
Right.
and fewer poor outcomes when nurses are staffed appropriately.
Absolutely.
And so, it's nice. We always say California leads the way in a lot of things.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's a lot of woke things that
Right.
they lead the way in. But, nurses do know, like going out to California, they do get a higher rate and they are staffed more
Right.
appropriately.
And a lot of
And
that is because of the California Nurses Association. Because there is a very, very strong collective, and they're extremely, the lobby is extremely powerful. The nurses, that is like in Kaiser Permanente, for instance, that's a closed shop. You have to pay dues, regardless of whether or not you want to be part of the union or not. You have to have a conscientious objector status or something in order to not pay dues. You have to pay dues. That's a lot of money. I mean, when I was working in California 100 years ago, it was like $36 a paycheck. Well, that's a lot of nurses, and that was then. So that was like, what? That's a lot of money. That's $72 a month. And I'm sure it's bigger than that now. This was back in the 2000s. And that when I was in a closed shop, that was back in 2005. It was a long time ago. But we had a lot of power. There was a lot of power in that because they could go to the legislature and they could say, we will lobby for you to get elected or to get your propositions passed or to stop your propositions if you will go and get us what we want, which is nurse-patient ratios. Title 22 is 2-to-1 in the ICU and in the recovery room. That's Title 22. And you get 3 patients in an ICU, that's going to be for like 2 minutes because they are scrambling to get you another nurse from somewhere. And they'll scrape it from somebody to get you another nurse or ship a patient out, to make sure that they're in compliance.
Right. So that is what we hope to see nationally now. Right. So before we get into the staffing and the history on that and actually talking about real life scenarios and stuff, let's just focus the rest of this first half on the suicide risk that they are citing.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So they had said that one of their big goals was to reduce suicide risk. And, I'll talk about it as an ER nurse. When a patient comes in and we're triaging them, we ask them, over the past 2 weeks, have you felt depressed or hopeless? And a lot of people say yes. I mean, they do. And if they do answer to that, then you move on to your questionnaire of, over the past couple weeks, have you felt like ending your life or someone else's? And now if they say yes to that, that automatically triggers a suicide risk. And we bring the physician is aware. A lot of physicians, they don't handle these things. They take it off. They move it to,
They turf it.
Yeah, they turf it. They turf it to like crisis prevention and recovery, right?
Right.
But we have to remove everything out of the rooms.
Right.
We have to lock the cabinet. We have to have eyes on that patient continuously. And we have to document every 15 minutes on a form. So that too can remove staffing from the floor.
Oh yeah. Now you've got a sitter. Now you need a sitter. And where is that staff going to come from? And it's usually you'd like it to be an ancillary staff member. It's somebody who's not licensed. But if you don't have somebody who's not licensed, it's going to be a licensed person. So it's going to be a nurse.
Mm-hmm. Right. Just sitting there watching a patient. That's it. Eyes on them. And there's a lot of ERs that have gotten creative and said, we're going to put them all in one area and then we'll have a tech that can see them through the window and monitor them. Or they're doing it remotely.
Right. Oof.
Right. But
Yeah.
I mean, just recently last week in the ER, I had a teenage girl that ran out, ran out of the hospital,
Oh gosh.
and she was waiting to receive a room. So she was there with her family, but we had to have our respiratory therapist ran out and grabbed her from
Sure.
going in the street.
That's all hands on deck. That's the way it works, right? I mean,
Right.
uh, it's so hard to do what needs to be done now because there's so many people in such crisis,
Yeah.
and what happens, what I find so galling is to see. I was just looking at the national performance goals for this new, that talking about suicide, and it's just more of the same. It just says directly asks about ideation, and then to make sure gives them how to get people things out of the room, and follow up care at discharge for patients identified. But it doesn't really do anything to produce, the staffing that needs to be there for that. And,
Mhm.
it requires thinking outside the box. It requires, that of course that's a sentinel event, right? So
Mhm.
if somebody killed themselves, right? But not everybody who expresses suicide ideation is going to kill themselves, right?
Right.
So you're not going to see a sentinel events, but you are going to have bad staffing issues because of people who come in and say that that they feel horrible and they've had thoughts of killing themselves in the last week. So it
Mhm.
doesn't, just because you're not seeing sentinel events, which is really, if you were seeing more awful outcomes, you probably would have more specific mandates. But I still don't know whether or not it would go beyond paper compliance. We did everything we could. Look, we checked this
Mhm.
box. We have this policy in place. It just becomes the paper compliance. And like I say, it requires thinking outside the box, moving forward with how we're going to deal with these problems when we don't have enough staffing at all. That
Mhm.
comes down to a budgetary issue. I mean, could you have a group of people that the hospital hires to be to be these helpers? Is that so
Mhm.
far? Is that outside the box? I mean, come on. But it's expensive.
Yeah.
It's expensive.
Right. Yeah, if you have somebody, even if they're making 20 bucks an hour, that's somebody just, staring at a person basically for $20 an hour. They don't
Exactly.
have, they can't care for the patient.
No,
They can't perform what a licensed provider can do.
and they wouldn't be
And then if you
expected to.
don't, right, and you wouldn't expect them to. And then we talk about, say with me in a critical access hospital, if we have a code coming in, again, that's all hands on deck.
Right,
Who is watching that suicide patient?
right. Well, every
What
day.
about the other person that's one to one? You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
It's really funny about this because I was thinking, how did this happen? How did we end up with the national performance goal for staffing? And it is it's my opinion. I don't know if it's too far from the truth that this came out of people who actually have had to deal with healthcare recently,
Mhm.
because everybody's having to go into the hospital and see the nightmare, the chaos, the poor care. When the thing that made me think about it was when you said, when all hands are on deck over here, guess what's happening down the hallway? There's
Mhm.
accidents happening. There's people falling. There's people not getting care. There's people dying. There's things that are happening because the staffing is so bad, or the emergency management is crushed, and then
Mhm.
you have actual human beings that are now going into the hospital and with their family members and seeing this. And what we can hope for is they are the kind of people that are on these boards of these regulatory agencies that are making some of these new performance goals
Mhm.
to do something about this, because we're all being affected by it. We're all being
Right.
affected
And
by
if
it.
not now, when?
Exactly. And that's why I get so
Mhm.
fired up about it. I'm like, we need the young, uh, really, really energetic nurses and ancillary people who have a sense of doing what's right, to use these tools to their advantage in a collective. But back to your thing about suicide, I find it interesting that these national performance goal doesn't look like it changed much. I'd have to look at the old goals to see whether or not there was any change this year. But I think it's probably pretty much the same, that you're still doing the same things, and then you're limping along. You're just limping along.
And then having to do these things is a time. I don't have time as a nurse to sit down and check these boxes for every 15 minutes to show that I'm in compliance. I need to be out on the floor. I need to be bedside with the patients. So there definitely has to be a balance of how much paperwork and charting do we do versus how much, that we are actually giving clinical care at the bedside. And that's really important.
Correct. And the thing that it really comes down to is when that time comes, and this is why it's so exhausting, and this is why it's so difficult. But the reality is that when you have a patient who's on suicide precautions and you have every 15-minute checks and you can't do it, it's got to go upstream. It's got to be documented, it's got to be incident reported, and it's got to be possibly confidentially sent to JCAHO or to the state or to somebody, because the reality is we got to stop checking boxes knowing darn well that we were unable to do that. But who's got the time or the energy at the end of their shift to run up the hill with the flag? It's hard. We have to be collective about it. It has to be a culture change within the facility where people feel emboldened to do this together. Now, I think unions are really important, but I think you can have a collective without a union. It's a culture change. We're not going to put up with this. We are not going to put up with this. And I think that's why, for me as an elder nurse, that's why I think it's going to be the young ones, like in their 20s and 30s, that are going to say, I want to save my profession. I'm not going to do this. I refuse to do this, rather than pack their bag and leave. That's the thing that crushes me, is that they're packing their bags, they're going to get their nurse practitioner, they're getting out of the hospital system, they're walking away. You can't blame them, right? But this national performance goal is, to me, I do not want to hear the eye rolling or see the eye rolling. It'll never work. The IORs. This is something that we can do. If we're going to have a person on suicide precautions, and we're going to check boxes, then we need to make sure we're holding the administrators and the executives accountable for the fact that we could not do that. We don't want to be in a punitive place. Oh, I couldn't do it. I should feel bad about that. No, I can't. I can't do it, and I'm documenting it. Documented in the record. Unable to as a result of. And now we can get, if they do this, we can get down to nurse-patient ratios. We say the nurse-patient ratio was 8-1. Therefore, I was unable to. That's going to really be ugly.
And it is. And it's like, and it's part of the ethics that it's having the language to present that in a fashion that your supervisor, manager, CNO has to acknowledge and handle versus complaining.
Exactly.
Okay. We cannot be complaining and think, that stuff is going to change.
Right.
That is where ethics and the language and knowing the code is so very important. Correct. And on the second half of the break, we're going to get into that. I'm going to discuss a situation that happened to me.
Okay.
And Susie's going to weigh in as well. And we're going to talk about these new national performance safety goals in context with the state staffing, because you hit the nail on the head there, Susie. It's about a culture change. That is exactly what it's about, and letting nurses know and being empowered, through all ages, your 20-year-olds and your 70-year-olds.
Right.
And the 70-year-olds are saying, oh, I've heard this before. Nothing's going to change.
Right.
But getting on board with those that are energetic about saving the profession and their integrity. and their peace and
Yes.
their license.
Yes. And the skills and the gifts given to them by God. They're caregivers. They're altruistic. They want to help people. That's why they went into nursing, because they have the gift of helping. They have the gift of being able to care. They have the gift of being able to think critically and do what's right and do it well. The team needs to get back together, and this includes medical. The medical team has to be involved in this too.
Right. And we're going to go to a break here, guys. You are listening to Nurses Out Loud. We are on various platforms, but AmericaOutloud.news is our flagship. And I encourage you guys to go to AmericaOutloud.news and AmericaOutloud.shop if there's any products or anything that you are that you're hearing about or considering. We have a family of sponsors here at America Out Loud. And it's really what keeps our lights on here, guys. So go check out AmericaOutloud.shop, and we will be right back after the break.
If you are a nurse that is fed up with the sick care model, I have a solution for you. My name is Melissa Schreibfetter, and I am the owner and founder of the Functional Nurse Academy. FNA is the most comprehensive functional medicine training program on the market, specifically tailored to nurses. It is self-paced and equips LPNs, RNs, and nurse practitioners to practice functional medicine, address the root causes of dysfunction, and start their independent functional medicine practices. At FNA, you will learn how to order labs, functional health reports, create customized wellness plans, package and price your services, and even how to market your brand effectively. Graduates earn 90 nursing CEUs, and then they qualify for multiple board certification titles. They also will have access to our exclusive tools, such as our Functional Nurse Toolkit, our social media and marketing kit. And I don't want to just train you and send you on your way. So you also will get access to me each month via the Functional Nurse Academy monthly mentorship program, where you will be able to attend a live class with me each month. So say goodbye to sick care and start your dream career as a functional medicine nurse. Enroll today at functionalnurseacademy.com.
Welcome back, guys. Thank you for joining me. I am your host, Nurse Jody O'Malley, and I'm joined today with Nurse Susie Eichinger, and we're breaking down the new National Performance Safety Goals issued by JCAHO that should be rolling out on January 1st, 2025. I believe there are
2026.
Or 2026. Thank you.
It's already over, man. 2025 is gone.
Well, that's how fast the time seems to be moving, isn't it?
It's crazy.
But in 2026, and they haven't outlined specifically all of their new standards, but they are highlighting that patient nurse to patient ratios are going to be a highlight. You want to talk about that, Susie?
Sure. Yeah. So their hospital national performance goals, there's 14, and there's a new one. It's goal 12, and it specifically states the hospital is staffed to meet the needs of patients it serves. The staff are competent to provide quality care. Now, it's really vague, right? So specifically, it talks about how there's some specific things, which one is accountability. The accountability is going to be specific to the nursing executive, who prior to now, I don't really know who the accountability was on, but as it is now, the new Joint Commission National Patient Safety Goal they have to develop a detailed data-driven staff plan for each unit and service area, accounting for patient census and acuity, the necessary number and mix of nurses, that's RN, LPN, and CNA, and the facility scope of services. And there has to be an RN on duty. and a licensed nursing executive must oversee all nursing services, and all the staff must receive the orientation and ongoing competencies. We know about that. That's not new. But one of the big things with this is that it is Joint Commission used to do a HR thing and the nursing care thing, and it were different chapters, and now they're pulling it together in staffing. So this signals that staffing is now a top tier organizational priority. It's not just an operational detail. And also that it's elevated the executive accountability, the role of the nursing executive. And this is a big deal because this is a way that we can send issues upstream, because there is a nursing executive who is being held accountable for that. And the reporting is actually, this effectiveness evaluations they're going to be directly pointing back to safety and quality issues. And they are going to have to account for this annually at board meetings. So this is a really big deal. And it puts us in a much more powerful place as far as having, you could call it a tool and you could call it a weapon of what we're going to actually have at our disposal for coming to our leaders and talking about how our staffing is. Now, it does not say anything specifically about nurse-patient ratios. They're going to have to find some kind of metric, right, in order to create a way of measuring this. Now, one of the things I find really interesting in it is it talks specifically about that they are going to have to identify having observed and amended or changed staffing mixes during a shift when things change. They're going to have to document and account for changes in census and changes in acuity. And so that, because it was like, here's my staffing, here's the end of the shift, and all hell broke loose in the middle. And there was nowhere to go with that besides complaining, right? Besides being burned out, besides being morally injured. Now there's going to be, whichever hospital you're in, they're going to have to develop a matrix and a metric in order to measure and be held accountable for staffing. And this is huge to me. This is huge. Again, like we talked about before the break, there might be a lot of eye rolling in this, but I think that it's a great opportunity for us to actually start holding those above accountable, especially the nursing executive. He or she is going to have to actually be accountable to what staffing is today.
Right. Like, for example, so let me give the listener a little bit of background of how things work. Okay. So typically you have your hospital supervisors or on the floor, they meet in the morning for staffing. Okay. This usually happens, shift changes around 7. They try to do that right before, so that they can talk about how many nurses they have on, what's their experience level, those types of things. And they typically, like Susie said, if you're an ICU level patient, 1 nurse for 2 patients. That's it. Med surge on day shift, because there's a lot of diagnostic testing, rounding, those types of things. They usually try to have it to be 1 to 4 or 1 to 5. And if they're tele patients, like requiring cardiac monitoring, 1 to 3, 1 to 4 is okay. And at night shift, they usually, on med surge at least, and even tele, they give that nurse 1 more patient. So 1 to 6, 1 to 4, 1 to 5, something like that, patient ratio. But there's a lot that happens in between. And you get those nurses that say are fully staffed or fully, loaded up with patients. But what happens is, say the ED decides to admit a patient. They call the the hospital supervisor. The hospital supervisor looks at their staffing in the hospital. They talk to the charge nurse on that floor, on that unit where the patient's going to. So let's use med surg, for example. Let's say all of your nurses are maxed out 1 to 5. Okay. But there's still beds available. And they feel like if there's a bed available, we can put a patient in that bed. Okay, well, who's going to handle it? So a good charge nurse will go and speak to the nurse and say, how are you doing? How is this patient? You could have a patient that, maybe on med surg, but their status changed. And now they are confused at night, right? Now you really say, they're having sundowners or whatever. So they got a really high load. But you usually try to talk to your nurse and say, can you handle this? A lot of hospitals now are trying to put the charge nurse in the count, which is another patient safety issue, right? Because if a charge nurse is having a patient assignment, then they're not on the floor to help. They're not on the floor to talk to others about what's going on, because now they're responsible for their own patient. So like Susie said, this is, I mean, a really big issue, because things do change during a shift, and usually not for the better.
Right. Right.
It's usually things happen, or you got a post-op patient and now you're documenting, Q15 vital signs, looking if there's bleeding at the post-op site, all of these things. There's a lot that goes on. But Susie, do you feel like now, when it come 2026, like nurses will have the language to use, and if they are short staffed, they can document it as a, MPG violation, not just a complaint?
Well, I think it's going to take a while. First off, we have to talk about it and we have to let people know about it, because I was actually talking about it the other day at my job. And I mean, of course, I just got the information a week ago. I think it's really important that people talk about it. And I think people need to be interested in it. Like, this has to be something that people recognize as something very important, as opposed to just that fatigue of, oh, they're just going to create more paperwork for us, or that this is, this nothing will ever work, right? And so, to answer your question, I think it could take a while, because there is also the problem with, if they're going to do a national safety goal, performance goal, and it's going to be about staffing, where are these nurses going to magically come from? I mean, nurses are leaving, the older nurses are leaving. A lot of people are leaving out of just regular attrition. People are becoming travelers. And then the nursing schools. I don't know what the nursing schools are doing right now, but we got to get nurses in the funnel. We've got to get them in the funnel to start with. Why anybody would be at the funnel at this point, I don't know, because you got to be really driven intrinsically to want to be a nurse at this point. If you have any idea what's going on in nursing, it would be hard to feel real positive about going into nursing. So it's going to be something that's going to take a while for us to change the culture in nursing altogether. I do have hope for the younger nurses to be able to do this, but I think that this is one of a piece of things. This is a piece of the whole, and what we can do in order to make a change at the bedside every day. And giving the nurses at the bedside tools, and then leadership at the bedside with nurses who feel emboldened to collect these nurses together and to get them all on the same page, talk to them, and then have them feel safe enough to stand firm together. Like, Jody, you're a nursing whistleblower. You get up and you raise your flag, you're putting a big, mark on your back. And we recognize that. But in mass, we do very well together, So to answer your question, I think it's going to take a while, but I think it's doable. I have hope.
Well, I think let's maybe share some of our experience, Susie. I'll start and give an example of how I handled unsafe staffing. Okay. And this isn't even just patient related, this is nurse staffing. And I know there was a culture at one of the hospitals that I worked at in the beginning, and it is what they call a standalone hospital. And in the beginning, it's 8 beds in the ER and 9 beds inpatient. And I remember when I got hired and I asked them what was the nurse staffing, and they said, oh, there'll be 3 RNs on at all times. Usually one person handles triage and then 2 nurses handle the 8 rooms. And I said, okay. Then I found out that it was the culture in the beginning for 2 nurses to run the entire ER.
Wow.
And I made it known in the beginning that I would never accept any patient assignment if there was only one other RN. And I cited it was because of patient safety. Said, we never know what's walking in that door, and I'm not putting my license on the line for that. And so it kind of started happening with a lot of call outs. I believe the flu shot made a lot of people sick, and they've been calling out now for, a month.
Wow.
And so every shift it was
Wow.
short staffed, and they thought, well, one of how they would rectify that was bring an LPN over. Well, the LPN is very experienced, but they can't do an initial assessment and they can't push any drugs. They can hang an IV and fluids or hang antibiotic and fluids, but they can't push anything. And in the ER, all we're really doing is pushing, right?
Right.
So I did work a shift where I did have an LPN, but again, I'm responsible for that patient, and I was responsible for the entire unit, and I was responsible for triage. And I told the head of the company, I said, I will not work with less than 3 RNs on. I will not. And if you want to bring in an LPN to do some task, their scope of practice is really low because they can't push a lot of things, and I remember when I had a conversation with them, I was thinking, okay, if I say this, am I prepared for him to not, schedule me anymore?
Right.
And
Exactly.
that's frightening. And that was frightening because I do need the job.
Of course.
But you know what? I also need my license. And if I'm accepting these roles and these assignments,
the
then my
consequences if
license is
somebody
on the
died on your shift or somebody even got injured on your shift, it's just it's intolerable. It's intolerable. And as nurses, we're constantly thinking ahead and assessing. So we're assessing 8 people that could just, decompensate all at once. That's like, it is so stressful to consider that. And if that happened on your shift when you knew darn well that it was unsafe, it would be devastating. This causes serious moral injury and post-traumatic stress disorder in these nurses. And you wonder why they leave the profession. How do you, and this is happening daily. This kind of thing is happening. And I think that's why the performance goal has ended up front and center as number 12 with JCAHO. But anyway, so what happened then?
Well, they said that they were going to make sure that there was a 3 RNs on, and I said, okay, because if not, one of you guys are going to have to come in and work.
That's right.
Period. And that's the thing, we have a younger, and it's not even younger, just inexperienced, right? Not as experienced. So you get these nurses that want to work in the ER so bad. They don't have the experience. Like even one of the nurses who is experienced, she's been a nurse for like 7 years and an excellent ER nurse. She suggested to me that I put the LPN in triage. And I said, I can't do that.
She can't assess.
your most experienced nurse needs to be in triage, because that's what drives the staffing and the placement of these patients,
Wow.
right? And the assessments, like, am I going to make them an ESI 4, or are they really an ESI 2? Am I worried about sepsis here? Maybe the patient does come in and they look okay, but once I put them in sit them in the chair and start talking to them you were just released from the hospital. Oh, that's a red flag. It's
Right.
those types of things that nurses who are not experienced are not aware of. And so you get a lot of them accepting these roles, not understanding that, no, number one, it's not the safest for the patient. And number two, they are risking their license.
They don't know what they
And
don't know.
so, right. And we're not even at season yet. It's only going to get busier, with people coming in. So they told me that they would staff appropriately and they would do the best that they could, and asked if I had any suggestions that I bring it to them.
Okay.
And, I'm PRN, so I'm not full-time staff. I don't really have a stake there. You know what I'm saying? And I'm doing Nurses Out Loud and Righteous RN. And the last thing I have time for is to really help with this. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. It's like, I don't have time to be your administrator. It's like, I'd love to help, but that takes time. That should actually be, that should be on the shoulders of the person who's making the people, the leaders who are making the decisions in there. I mean, it sounds great. Bring us, I love that. As a supervisor, I say to people, don't just bring me problems, bring me solutions. But ultimately, it's my responsibility to field those solutions and get an answer. It's not my responsibility to kick it back to the staff and say, fix this.
Yeah.
Well,
I will say that the supervisor did tell me that I have the ability to offer time and a half. And then if nobody bites on that, then I could offer $100 bonus on top of it.
That's
and
good.
if nobody bites on that, I can offer a $200 bonus.
Right.
So that was a solution.
Yeah.
And the other thing is making my position known. When I received a report from the charge nurse and she said, oh, somebody called out or somebody got in an accident, you only have 2 people. I was like, well, I'm sorry, but I'm not taking report from you. I'm not clocking in. And she kind of looked at me a little sideways, but you know what? I stood up not only for myself and patients, but also for everyone else going forward.
For her.
And that's how and that's how a culture changes, like you said, Susie, right?
Exactly. And when somebody like you stands up and says it and doesn't get fired, and actually change does come, then they might feel more comfortable standing under your wing. Because we do have to bring some of these people along. And, my tagline is be humble, be curious, and be courageous. We have to be courageous, but we also have to be humble. We have to be godly people that are kind and considerate, but we have to stand up and do what's right. We do it for our colleagues as well as for our patients. And I commend you for standing up for yourself and for everybody else. I hope it bears fruit. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with that, because that's really scary stuff.
Well, I know, I just received, I just saw in the chat that somebody else called off tonight. And then not too long after, I received a call from work and they're like, we're calling you in tonight. And I was like, okay, who am I working with?
There you go.
To ask those questions.
Mm-hmm.
And she told me that my supervisor will be there till 3 a.m.
Okay.
And I was like, cool.
Okay.
Cool.
Good.
That's awesome.
Good.
She'll come in and see how the
between a
flows.
Friday and Saturday, right after the bars close. Perfect. Yeah, that's great. So you're going to keep her there till 5. I'll tell you that.
Girl, you know it. If it is busy, yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're not leaving. That's patient abandonment. Sorry.
No, I mean, I see that they are really trying,
That's good.
and I appreciate it.
Well, they're stuck too, right? I mean, I love my leaders because, I've been in leadership positions a lot. The ones that care, we have to help them, by being humble and doing everything that we can to help them. But we also have to be willing to stand up and say, this isn't about you. This is about what we're going to try to do, a culture change. We're going to try to change things. I'm not beating you up. I am here to make this work, right? And you're not leaving. I know it's 3 o'clock, but you're
and
not
exactly. Like I didn't come in complaining and telling people like, oh, I talked to them and I'm not doing this and I'm not doing that and da 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 da.
Right.
No, that is not what we need to do, because that undermines the culture, right?
Exactly.
And so I didn't come in there with that. I just came in like, they know where I stand. I expect all of you guys to feel this way.
Exactly.
Because again, if you frame everything back to patient safety, it's really hard to argue against that.
Yeah.
Really hard to argue against it. And I mean, in one shift, just in a small hospital, we had 7 transfers, 34 patients we saw. That's a lot of people.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's super important, guys, to stand up. And, I also too, I use that conversation to also tell my supervisor that on November 1st, when they're trying to implement this mask mandate for those who didn't take the shot, I said, oh, by the way, I'm going to be removing my shifts on November 1st because I'm not wearing a mask because I didn't take the shot. And he also said, I'll handle that as well.
Really?
And he's like, that's what he said. He said, that's not the directive. The directive is for people to wear a mask if they're symptomatic.
Thank you.
And right. And so I said, well, you may want to talk and figure it out, because that's not the communication
is that really
has been
true. That sounds like he changed it. That doesn't sound right. I'm not buying it. I never know. That is not what they say. That was slick right there. That was super slick.
It was. And then I thought too, Susie, I was like, oh, don't even get me started on the symptomatic thing, because if you're symptomatic, you need to stay home.
You shouldn't be here. Yeah, you're symptomatic. Right. You got your mask on and you're all like, oh, gross.
Touching it. Right. Exactly.
Symptomatic with your vector on your face. Ugh. Gosh.
And your petri dish. Like, no, we're not doing this.
Oh my goodness gracious.
All right, guys. Well, listen, I hope you enjoyed the show. I always enjoyed talking to Nurse Susie. Thank you so much for being here, Susie.
Great.
And guys, really, truly reach out to us. Subscribe to our Substack. You get notified every time a show drops. And you can also communicate with us. You can send us an email, nursesoutloud@gmail.com. Let us know what you think of the show. Like, save, comment on it, share it out so people are hearing what we're talking about. This is the only way that we can encourage ethical integrity or ethical behavior, integrity, some grit in the nursing profession. That's my tagline, where integrity, grit, and faith drive ethical care.
Right.
And we can't be afraid to speak out. I mean, there's so many more of us than them.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
We hear that.
And I really encourage any nurses that are listening to this to go to the jointcommission.org and look up national performance goals and become familiar with this goal that's coming through in 2026, and brace yourselves and educate yourself on how you may be able to work with your leaders to develop the programs that they're going to need, because they're going to have to. This is the bottom. This is the goal. This is what they want, but it has to be built. So be part of building it. Be part of it. And then you can own it, and then you can hold them accountable to it.
Great advice. Great advice. All right, friends, until next time, be safe, be well, and God bless. Awesome. That was good.
Shining light into darkness, thank you for tuning in to Nurses Out Loud.